Thank you, Gordon. Yes, I'm here 4:45 in the morning, and as we arise here, the day is still dark, but I look forward to the sun shining on us and getting started with a constructive and productive Saturday. So, good evening to all of you, and welcome to this session, which is all about presenting yourself with impact in each and every interaction, whether that be in a presentation format, whether it be an interview for further education, as more and more institutions are using not just high school marks, but also interviews to select the people who can go into tertiary education, but also as you start to consider jobs, internships, work experience roles, those sorts of things. These skills will serve you well. Now, here's an interesting observation. I mean, obviously, the forces at work now around the world, some to do with the pandemic we're experiencing, some to do with the changes that are being experienced in every industry, and some just broader social trends that have been going for some time, they're accelerating. And as a result of that, the world in which your careers will unfold is also different from the one that I joined, and certainly very different from the one that my father, my mother, my grandfather joined before us. And there are some really deep changes to that. One is that the nature of your relationship with your employer is a bit different. This idea of an employer for life, not quite as dominant today as it was when I started. Today, you might expect to have multiple employers over the course of your career, and sometimes you'll go back to a prior employer. Not long ago, that was almost unheard of. The second is the nature of the work that you do. I mean, we used to train up for particular jobs. These days, not so much. Some of the jobs you will do in your career don't exist yet. There are new sorts of jobs appearing all the time. No longer are we preparing ourselves to be just a doctor or a lawyer or a plasterer or a carpenter, whatever it might be, right? We train ourselves up with transferable skills. And that's important in terms of preparing the documents like your CVs, your cover letters, the way you build your personal narrative, and we'll get to that in a moment. I guess the third thing about it is even if you are with an employer, even if you are inside an institution furthering your education, a university or other things, you can expect that the way you engage with your colleagues will require frequent interviewing. That is, the nature of work is changing. The future of work inside organizations is far less about just doing your job and far more about involving yourself in little projects, initiatives, and other things, forming teams from across the organizations in different divisions to work on particular projects. You'll come together, work on the initiative, and then dissipate. Those people who can make every interaction count are the ones that will get involved in those most interesting projects. So today we'll be talking about this idea of impact, presenting yourself with impact in every interaction. And I guess there are two elements to this. Just as if you're writing an essay or producing a report or in school, there are two elements to it. The first is this issue of substance. How much research have you done? What's the content of your personal brand? You know, as you write any of the assignments that you might do for school, of course, there's an element of content. The second thing is a style thing. As you write your essays, there are comparative essays, there are argumentative essays, there are creative ones, and much the same when you're presenting yourself for interaction. There are a whole element of style elements that we need to select from in order to be appropriate for the particular circumstance or particular interview that you're working with right now. So as Gordon indicated, my name is Tim Chilvers, and I work for an organisation called the Colin Method. Now, my career has followed a winding path. I've worked in banks where I live here in Australia. In the early part of my career, I did that. I then worked for an international bank that brought me to London, where my family are from, and we lived in Putney and Barnes for a couple of years while I worked for a global bank, Citigroup. Later on, after I returned to Australia, I decided I wanted to reinvent. So this idea of not only exploring different roles within banks that required me to interview all the time, making sure that my personal brand extended across global cultures in those banks, I also decided that I would start to explore other industries. So now, for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been working with the Colin James method, working on realizing the potential that exists in people, in teams, and in organizations by training, coaching, facilitating, and consulting. And every time I interact now, I think about it as an interview. So that's why the techniques we'll be looking at now are so important for you, likely to be a lifelong journey, even after you've got your education, even after you've got your job that you will feel is your forever job. That doesn't stop the time when you will continue to interview. So I guess there are 4 things that I'd like to cover off today. The first of them is working on the substance element. How do we build your personal narrative? What are the elements that come together to describe who you are? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are the things you like doing? What's the role you normally play in group dynamics? The second one is, what are the documents that you'll have to prepare in preparation for the interview? Because to be honest with you, the interview is only one step in a process. Some of the things that determine how you will perform in that interview start long before the day you turn up. Thirdly, the interview itself. So we'll have a bit of a discussion around the confidence. We'll also talk a little about the difference between a live interview and a virtual setup. So I'll spend a bit of time talking about that. And then lastly, how do we make sure that our profile is visible to potential employers, that the things they will look for once they read your CV on social media, in various gatherings that you may attend, how do we make sure that you stand out from the crowd? So firstly, this idea of the personal narrative. Now, if you haven't read this book, it's good reading. I mean, I know you guys as students, you have enough reading to do. But there's a great book written by Jim Collins. It's called Good to Great. It's a fairly easy to read business novel, and each chapter is dedicated to an industry that's dominated by a few players who are at the top of that industry. Lo and behold, in each of these case studies, one breaks from the pack and starts to dominate the industry above and beyond its peers. And this idea of becoming a great player from what was good by focusing on something about that company that makes it exceptional and dismissing the things where you're mediocre. And this is the foundation stone for thinking about building your personal narrative. Not what are you okay at, what are you really great at? Not what do you like or what can you tolerate, but what do you really love? And thirdly, sort of starting to think about that lens of what's available out there. How do I match what I'm great at, what I really love doing, and what's available in terms of educational opportunities, employment opportunities, even just industries and people you want to be around. Those 3 lenses are the foundations for your personal narrative. Getting a really clear understanding on who you are is key. Now, I know you're early in your lives. For most of you, you may not have had a job. You may not have held leadership positions. You may not have long lists of achievements or experiences that you could use to display your credentials. But you will have noticed that when you interact with your peers, when you're in a classroom, when you're on a particular sporting team or in a music team or in a musical drama performance, or when whatever it is that you do, there is a particular role that you play. For some of you, it's right out front. It's this whole idea of leading from the front of the pack. For others of you, and this is completely okay and not better or worse, you are a key player in the industry. You're a glue that holds it all together. It's not just the leaders that have a place in modern world. It's also those key players that hold things together. For some of you, you're a relationship-driven person. For some of you, it will be that you've got some technical expertise. You might be the drummer in a band, and you may think about the contribution you add as being the person who lays down the beat that allows other people to perform. Getting a very clear understanding on on who you are when you interact with other people is really key. So just going back over the themes there, what are you great at? What do you really love? And how does that map to opportunities, people, industries, educational opportunities that you'll see in the field, see in the world? Great at, love, opportunities that are out there. As you start to map those things out, think about where the points of intersection are. What am I really good at? And I love it. If those things overlap, you've got the genesis for a fantastic trail of breadcrumbs to your happy place in your career. Start to think about all of those formative experiences and the way they've told you or taught you who you are when you're in group dynamics, and that's an important part of your narrative. The second thing I said we'd talk about are some of those documents that we pull together, some of those things that precede you when you turn up for an interview. You'll see there might be a course that you want to apply to, and that might not only look at your school marks but also the interview, and you'll have to submit an application. Or it might be that you're looking for jobs and you'll have to submit a cover letter and a CV. Whatever it is, the three questions we see employers ask all the time are these. And these are going to surprise you because they're not the traditional ways that people construct CVs. Even for very, very senior roles. I'm the director of a recruitment company that does what they call C-suite roles, so chief executive, chief financial officer, chief marketing, those sorts of things. And the three questions they ask, even as it relates to senior roles, are these. What's this person like? It's kind of weird, right? What are they like? It's the sort of thing you might ask about somebody on, you're meeting socially. What are they like? But what they really mean is this person, like I said before, are they a leader? Are they a key player? Are they somebody who bonds teams together? What are they like? The second is, what are they good at? And this is where that whole work you did in your personal narrative becomes clear. And I'd suggest the end game is to pull, say, 3 themes out of that work you do on your personal narrative that you use to articulate what you're really good at. And you put that in your CV. So what do you like? Have a few paragraphs there that describe the sort of person you are. And then what are you really good at? These are your key skills or competencies. And that's where we start to pull out 3 themes. It might be that this person is really good at building relationships. It might be that you're really good at observing patterns and finding insights in information. It might be that you're really good at maintaining your energy when workload is really high. Whatever those things are that you're really good at, that's the second thing that should go in your CV. The third question after what's this person like, what are they good at, is what have they done? Now, I know, again, you're early in your career, so a lot of what you've done is in the school environment, but just sort of starting to build a track record of those achievements. I was part of the class that did this particular debate. I did this particular musical theatre. I did this. Just starting to build a list of achievements that demonstrate that you're not just a person who possesses potential. You've, at whatever stage you've been in your life, been starting to use that potential to deliver achievements. So this is the thing in your CV. What's this person like? Have a couple of paragraphs narrative describing your personality. What are they really good at? A couple of themes there about things you've noticed that you're really outstanding. And then what have they done? So a little bit of a track record of achievements, the way you've used your potential and your strengths in various scenarios. The second and third elements of the documents is the cover letter. The cover letter here is something that sits in front of your CV, and it's particular to the opportunity that's in front of you. So your CV, tweak it a little for the various things you're applying for, but your cover letter is where you'll introduce your CV, this should be very tailored to the opportunity. So the cover letter should cover off things like the key selection criteria, whether it's a university course, whether it's a short-term employment opportunity, a work experience and other things, whether it's a longer-term career opportunity, they'll generally have key selection criteria. This person must be good at relationships. And then you should match your experience. A couple of words on why you're really good at that particular key selection criteria. So that's your experiential fit or your skill fit, covering off those key selection criteria. The other thing that we like to see in cover letters is why this is a motivational fit for you, why this course or this job or this employment experience is a motivational fit for you. Now that means explain why you want to do it. Because if we have a handful of candidates, all equally qualified, all equally attractive to us in terms of the type of person they are, the one that's likely selected is the one for whom we can see the clearest reason for them to apply to work for us. They really want to do that because that's the person who's going to deliver the passion that we're looking for. So we've talked about the CV or the resume. We've talked then about the cover letter. And the third element to the documents that you would be presenting on yourself is your LinkedIn profile. Now, some of you will have Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram profiles. I suggest you get yourself onto LinkedIn because this is a forum that sort of rounds out your social media experience. Now, at this point in time, you may not have much to add. You may not have much to put into your profile, but starting to build it now is a great way to ensure that when you enter the workforce, you've got a LinkedIn profile that will work for you. The idea is, again, like your CV, a little bit of a cover letter on who you are, and then a little bit of experience that follows. In your news feed in LinkedIn, you'll see something very different from your Instagram feed, your Facebook feed, and those other things that you might be part of, TikTok or Snapchat or whatever it is. In your LinkedIn feed, you'll see little insights, little bubbles, thought bubbles from leaders, from people who participate in industry about the emerging themes that each company is dealing with. And maybe they will ask a question, as we often do at the Colin James Method, in relation to thoughts that we have. Who's had an experience on this? It's very important to start building an appropriate profile on the right social media platforms to give people a sense on who you are. So if, for example, you wanted to be, choose one of my ex-employers, Citigroup's LinkedIn page, if you like their page, you'll get articles posted by their leaders, you'll get insights, you'll get questions, and you'll get a feel for what's going on in that place. Now, it's very easy to believe that if I comment on an article, no one sees it. I'll tell you what, they do. Because even big organizations like that, like Citigroup, who has 150, 200,000 people working with them all across the globe, when it comes to managing their social media platforms, they notice who comments on their articles. They notice who says what. And if you ever were to apply there, people might do a little bit of research on you and see what sorts of insightful comments that you've been adding to those things. So that's the documents: your cover letter, your CV, your LinkedIn profiles, and your other social media platform presence. All of those things will be looked at. They'll be reviewed as you're preparing yourself to apply for roles. The next one, the third element we promised to talk about today, is the interview itself. Now, here's the thing. The biggest thing in interview is confidence. Now, we have a colleague, his name is Mark. He's a senior leader now, and he said, early on in my career, I decided that I wouldn't just turn up to meetings. I would arrive. I arrived at the meeting. I didn't turn up. Now, what we're not talking about here is arrogance, but not being apologetic when you turn up either. You arrive, right? You walk in. You don't walk into your lounge room at home or your family room or anything. But very often we see nervous people walk into that environment, that sort of interview environment, not setting a tone of confidence from the outset. That is, their posture is all stooped, and their body is small, and they go into what we call the meek prayer position. Now, be respectful, sure, but stand at your full height, shoulders back, relax your shoulders, breathe from your diaphragm. This whole idea of using your physiology, your gestures, your movement, and even your facial expressions. Now, for those of you who are inclined to watch videos on the internet, there's a lovely TED talk. Go to TED.com. Put in a lady's name. Her name is Amy Cuddy, AMYCUDDY. There's a TED talk there. And she talks about the importance of body language and the connection between your mind, your voice, and your body. Now, we often think about our minds controlling our body, but what Amy explores is the way that our body language can affect the way our brains are governing our emotional state. And remember, confidence is an emotional state. So we should be able to access confidence at any time. And Amy's video reminds us that your body language is one way to do that. If we stoop, if we close our posture down, if we cross our arms, then our body starts to send chemicals around our bloodstream that are about reduced confidence. We close down. If we slump in our chair, if we, sort of one of those sorts of, you can already hear my voice getting lower. By contrast, as Amy indicates, if we hold ourselves tall, shoulders back, elbows away from your body as you're communicating, like you're seeing me do now, your brain says, we're doing confidence now. And it starts to release those chemicals that are associated with confidence. In fact, Amy even goes a little further. She says before an interview, before a big presentation, before whatever it might be that she does, she goes into the stalls in one of the bathrooms and she holds a power pose like Wonder Woman or Superman. And it just lets those positive chemicals race around her body in preparation. Now, most of you will be familiar with the very, very personable and very famous scientist. His name is David Attenborough, who does those wildlife documentaries and has been doing them for all of my life. And he says things like this all the time. The great grassy plains of the African savanna, once home to our ancestors, still the food bowl of Africa. Now this herd of antelope are happily grazing away, completely unaware that they're about to have a bad day, right? And then the camera pans in, it sees the lioness, and the lioness is hunting, and then it comes out of the rushes, and the antelope scatter, and they're all nervous and underconfident. Now, here's the difference between what the antelope are facing in the field that sparks that risk observation in their brain that drives the nervousness and anxiety, and what we feel mostly as anxiety on a daily basis. For the antelope, this is a life and death struggle. For you, what you perceive as very, very important risks may in fact not be life or death struggles. In fact, it's pretty rare that they will be. Now, sometimes it will be, I know, but in most cases they won't be. You'll perceive risk associated with an interview. You'll perceive risk associated with exams. You'll perceive risk associated with selection on in a job, whatever they might be. Now, what I am not saying is don't try hard, don't take the performance in your exam seriously. I'm not saying that. You should do the best that you can. But don't let your emotional state rise to a level where it affects your ability to perform. Now, I can tell you, when I left school, I didn't go to university. I didn't get the marks to get into whatever it is that I wanted to do. But now I've done a bachelor degree. I've done a graduate diploma. I've done a second graduate diploma. I've done a first master's in applied finance, and I've done nearly completed my second master's in entrepreneurship and innovation. Not one of those courses did I access through the traditional channels. I interviewed for them later. I did something in the workforce that got me recognized and noticed. I went to night school and then transferred to different place. So what I'm saying is if we should always take these things seriously, but don't let your anxiety that this is make or break affect your ability to perform. Don't let yourself do that at all, because that will reduce your confidence. There will always be a path back if you're determined enough for what it is that you want to do. So let your confidence be, I am ready to deal with whatever may come. I will perform at my best. Very often that will be enough. Sometimes it won't be. And if I've failed to secure that position, or I've failed to secure my entry, or whatever it might be, then our job is to find another way through. Now, Interviews are interesting. So if we're in a physical setting, of course, when you're seated, as you often will be, don't let your back touch the back of the chair. Sit up, stand from the waist up, have your hands visible on the table, and maintain as much eye contact as possible. That's a physical environment, and mostly we've been trained with the things to do and the things not to do in that environment, so that should be pretty familiar to you. In a virtual setting, though, this is changing, and some of those things feel like they go out of the window, but the principles are the same. When we set ourselves up for a Zoom or a Teams or a Google Meet interview or discussion, the principles are simply that we use the whole space. We set ourselves up so we've got a box we can move around. The principle here is that I make as much of myself visible as possible. I make sure that I've got good lighting that's shining on my face. I maintain eye contact. Now, eye contact on a virtual call, what do you mean by that? Well, we're trained to look at the person talking on the screen. So I'm looking down in the bottom right-hand corner of my screen now, and you can see my eye contact has been broken. Here's the tip. The illusion of eye contact on a virtual call is created by looking at the camera. So if you're in a virtual interview environment, which must be happening more and more, I suggest you put a little post-it note up behind your camera on your computer with a little arrow saying, look here, because it's by looking down the barrel of the camera that you have the highest possibility of creating that illusion of eye contact. Just one more thing on interview technique is this idea of structure of your answers. When you turn up to interviews, you'll likely be met by this sort of reception. Oh, hello, Jenny, or hello, George, or whomever it is. Thanks for coming along today. We're going to do an interview, and what we're going to do is we're going to present you with a series of scenarios to assess what you would do in these places. It'd be great if you could bring examples from your past. And we call this a behavioural interview. Not scary at all. How does that sound? Now, the temptation at this point is to say, sure, yeah, go ahead. But this is an opportunity lost to make that first imprint of my personal brand. At this point, how does that sound going through a behavioural interview? We have an opportunity to set up that personal narrative. Henry, that sounds great. And I hope that in every one of my answers, I'm able to display the three things that are central to my personal brand. And those are, firstly, that I'm a team player. Secondly, that I'm always looking for ways to improve. And thirdly, that my work ethic is second to none. Now, I've made those three things up. Whatever your three things is up to you and the output from the process of building your personal narrative. But let's not be too passive and submissive to the process. Let's take every opportunity, including those opening moments, to articulate our why. What are the first three things that we would want somebody to know? And of course, these are the key strengths and competencies that you've taken from that process of your personal narrative. Use them. The interviewer will be impressed that you've got that self-awareness, and you've almost given them the criteria by which to judge your answers. The last thing is about how do we build our profiles. Now, of course, you're on various social media platforms. You're early on in your job search or your program search or your course search, so you may not know exactly what you want to do. Here am I, I'm 50 next week. And I still don't really know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, It's always an unfolding story. Some people, they start their life with a very clear idea of what they want to do. My eldest daughter was one of those. She always wanted to be a pharmacist. And today, at 29 years old, she's one of Australia's leading pharmacists in the field of neurology, epilepsy, and mental health pharmaceuticals. She lectures all over the place and works in one of the largest hospitals here. But I'd say she's the exception rather than the rule. So think about yourself in terms of transferable skills rather than particular outcomes, and start building that profile around the place. So if you think you have an interest in science, Start liking the social media pages of the big research institutes, of the big pharmaceutical companies, of the big scientific companies. And you'll start to see a feed of the things that they're talking about. The forums that they're holding, a lot of these centres have tours of their research facilities and other things. If you think you might like financial services, like the pages of the big banks, insurance companies, retirement savings companies, whatever they might be, and you'll start to see those things that are relevant. So we're building our awareness and our profile through social media platforms. And the second thing about that is once we've built that awareness and we see those profiles, turn up to the big events, the career days, those other things that are available and often poorly attended by younger people because we simply don't know they're happening unless our school brings them to our attention. So that's all I wanted to cover off today. They're the 4 elements of interviewing with impact that I thought we could cover in half an hour or 40 minutes or so. The first is this idea of building your personal narrative. The second is get your documents in order, your cover letter, your CV, but also your virtual documents, in particular your LinkedIn page. Thirdly, interviewing, how do we get that confidence up to present, put our best foot forward? And lastly, how do we build our profile?